Well, this is Sky News. In just a moment, the press preview, a first look at what is on the front pages. First, though, our top stories. Rishi Sunak has welcomed inflation falling back to 2%, but a new poll suggests the Tories could be left with the lowest number of seats ever after the election. Just Stop Oil activists have sprayed orange paint on Stonehenge just days before the summer solstice. And Scotland have kept their hopes alive by drawing 1-1 tonight in the European Championships against Switzerland. Well, hello there, you're watching the press preview, a first look at what is on the front pages. Time then to see what's making the headlines with Kevin Maguire, Associate Editor of the Daily Mirror, and Annabel Denham, Deputy Comment Editor at the Telegraph. Welcome to both of you. So, to the front pages then. Grim reading has to be said for Downing Street tonight. A terrible prediction for the Conservatives on the front of the Telegraph. Tory wipeout is the headline. Their exclusive poll suggesting the Tories will be left with just 53 seats. A different poll, similar story on the front page of the Eye. Tories despair as poll signals their worst defeat in 200 years. That's a YouGov poll carried out with Sky News. And from the Times as well, the same. Tories set to suffer the worst poll defeat for 100 years. On the Financial Times, some better news for the PM. Sunak claims the credit as inflation hits the Bank of England's target for the first time in 3 years. The Guardian focusing on Labour and the Shadow Chancellor Rachel Reeves's pledge to close the gender pay gap once and for all if her party wins the election. Elsewhere, the Metro leads on the murder of Leah Croucher, who's believed to have died defending herself against a sex offender. And the Mirror looking ahead to England's next game at the Euros. Their headline, Kane the Danes. Kevin will explain this all soon. A reminder, by scanning the QR code you'll see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's newspapers while you watch us. So let's discuss this all with Kevin and Annabel, as I said. Look away now, Downing Street. Let's do the YouGov Sky News poll, first of all, which is the lead story for both the Eye and, in fact, the Times as well. Tories despair as poll signals the worst defeat in 200 years, back to the formation of the Conservative Party.
These are just phenomenal numbers. And they've been here now for weeks, and I keep thinking the polls are going to change, and they haven't. And so you can get these figures of massive Labour majorities, massive, getting 425 seats, the Tories down on 108, and it's just, I mean, it's a political earthquake, and it's happening because there is this big fracture on the right of British politics between the Conservative Party and Reform UK. Reform UK, Nigel Farage's mob taking most of their votes from the Conservative Party. And it's a gift to Keir Starmer and Labour, who could win less than the 40% share of the vote Jeremy Corbyn gotten lost in 2017, and have an absolute landslide under the first-past-the-post system. And of course, the implications are Starmer will be able to do whatever he likes, or they'll have to manage a huge, probably unwieldy party with people who will never be able to give jobs, and do they, after a few months as MPs, become disillusioned? And then you'll have a Conservative Party that is just going to be absolutely smashed. Is it taken over by Farage? Is it replaced by Reform UK? Or does it somehow regroup in whatever way? But this is, we're living through history. We are living through political history, which will be studied in 100 years' time. And a big boost for the Liberal Democrats in that YouGov poll as well, up to 67. And Reform on 5, despite the share of the vote they might get being predicted to be higher or projected to be higher. The problem for them, of course, is their vote is spread too thin.
Exactly. I mean, this is the nature of the political system that we have in the UK at the moment. Unfortunately, you might argue people may not feel after this next general election that they are being adequately represented at a parliamentary level, but nonetheless, that's the situation that we find ourselves in. As Kevin says, there is a sense that we're living through a historical moment now. This looks like Armageddon for the Conservative Party, an extinction level event, and they find themselves in a position where it's not beyond the realm of possibility that they will not be the official opposition. after the general election, that will go to the Liberal Democrats. And what will that mean for, Kevin talked about a supermajority, what would it mean for our democracy to have such a left-wing parliament in a country that is, broadly speaking, I would say, centrist?
Stop.
He cannot conceal his glee.
Wonderful.
He's had 14 years in the doldrums, let's be fair. So two numbers to remember. One, the 80-seat majority Boris Johnson won in 2019, and this YouGov poll putting the Tories at 108. You ain't seen nothing. Let's show you the Daily Telegraph. Tory wipeout. First of all, the change in colour. 2019, on the left of your picture, SNP ruling the roost, obviously, in Scotland. But there you are, the blue of England. Switch to the projection in this poll in the Telegraph, Annabel, your paper, and the Tories down to 53 seats.
It's just an extraordinary moment for the party. And just a few days ago, we were talking about the irony of the Conservatives going from an 80-seat majority down to 80 seats. And even that felt like an exaggeration. And yet here we are, the Tories potentially getting just 53 MPs. If the polls are to be believed, if people's stated preferences turn out to be their revealed preferences on the night, then, as I say, this is an extinction-level moment for the Conservatives. This is going to be reminiscent, not of 1906 here in the UK, I don't think, but more the Conservatives in Canada in 1993 when they were left with 2 seats, because you'll have a similar situation where they are going to have important strategic decisions to make over their future. And the party will be so split. It'll be split between the One Nation Tories and the Tories on the right of the party. And there's an analysis on the front
But, it depends who's left.
Well,
never mind the Red Wall.
Matt.
It's goodbye East Anglia. It's really extraordinary.
Bye-bye Loopy Liz. There'll be no truss. I can't see any blue for Richmond.
No.
For Rishi Sunak. Wales, to me, I'm not quite sure the border, but it looks entirely Tory-free. I'm one who believes in a fairer electoral system, one in which a party's national vote is roughly reflected by the number of MPs in the House of Commons. We don't have that. The Conservatives have benefited from it before. Labour looks like it's going to benefit massively from it this time. But it is the system, it's the rules of the game, we're playing it, and I think the Telegraph has done that wonderfully. You can have bar charts on the front of the eye, which I like, but you just draw a map like that and you see the change from blue to red, and you get how dramatic the change will be. It's a kind of
a seminal moment in British political history.
If the projections are accurate.
So we're talking about a Tory wipeout, but let's take a look at it from the Labour numbers. Labour, in this poll, forecast to have 516 seats and an estimated House of Commons majority of 382. And bearing in mind here another number to throw at you, double that one by Sir Tony Blair back in 1997, which in itself was that seismic moment in British politics, wasn't it?
Yes, it was. I mean, Labour could potentially have 10 times the number of seats of the second largest party in British politics, approximately speaking. Again, Kevin.
I know Keir Starmer promised change, but this is,
But I think what is, I think, worrying is that it doesn't feel reflective, that actually Labour are polling on around 38%. How can that translate into 500 seats, a supermajority? And it speaks to the disillusionment that so many people feel in general with politics today. There's an expectation that the turnout might be quite low. It's still this close to the general election. There are a large number of undecideds. Of course, you've got that fractured vote on the right. The problem for the Tories is that, their core voters do feel this sense of disenchantment. They do want to exact some kind of revenge, punish the Tories. They may throw their support behind reform. That's a large part of this story. But how Keir Starmer will manage that? Is there a sweet spot actually for the Prime Minister in terms of the number of seats that he has? And Tony Blair managed a very large majority very well. I have my doubts that Keir Starmer will be able to
To
control
be fair,
his
just quickly,
party in the
Ipsos,
same way.
you know, the poll that came out yesterday had 117 seats, which were, you know, effectively a small swing would make a big difference. So almost too close to call type seats. There may well be those as well.
But that's the nature of the electoral system. A small swing can just knock down so many when it doesn't really reflect the mood of the country. But I don't recall any complaints from the Conservatives in 2019 when on under 44% of the vote, they got way over 50% of the MPs. In fact, they needed fewer votes per MP than Labour did. But maybe it will ignite a debate on a more proportional electoral system. Maybe it will, but you have to win power in order to implement that. And if Keir Starmer, which he wasn't, was promising to bring in a new electoral system, he wouldn't be now when he's sitting on this mountain of bodies.
We had a vote with the coalition, didn't we? A vote on
2011,
AV,
a referendum.
Terrible turnout, I seem to remember. Is that
Yeah,
right?
and it lost 2-1. But it was the additional member system, which I like.
Right.
The Lib Dems didn't, and the country rejected. But that's partly because they had enough of Nick Clegg.
Sometimes
at the time.
it's just too complicated for
Yeah,
us.
the House of Commons in 1931 backed electoral reform, but then the Labour government fell. It hadn't got through the Lords.
I mean, ultimately, in a first-past-the-post system, if you cannot secure around 30% of the vote, then you are facing a wipeout. And when you consider that the headwinds facing the Tories aren't just their 14 years in power, aren't just the recent scandals and chaos, as Keir Starmer likes to say, but the fact that we have a political realignment that's been underway for the last decade or so, which means that voters are not divided along economic lines so much as they are cultural ones. It has meant that the Tories have been trying to unite these very different coalitions of voters. But in some ways, the Labour Party have as well, between the Liberal metropolitan elites and traditional red wall working.
The people running the Conservative Party now are weeping the whirlwind they created with Brexit. And that they kind of created a Frankenstein monster in Nigel Farage, who was an ally at that time of them, and he's now devouring them. In 2019, he pulled all his candidates. Only stood against Labour, didn't stand against Conservatives and helped Johnson get his majority. Now, he's all out just to smash the Conservative Party, get his revenge, and Labour is the winner. But there we are. It's all, you can trace it back to Brexit, this.
Well, just going back to the eye, if we see that again, and talking about the extraordinary coalition that you're suggesting Boris Johnson pulled together, actually in 2019, the paper up the top says 2028 looks increasingly attractive to Boris Johnson. So there we are. We'll wait and we'll watch this space. In the meantime, if we say small swings will have a massive impact on the scale of this wipeout so far predicted and projected, the Financial Times picking up on inflation, hitting the Bank of England's target for the first time in very nearly 3 years, I think it is, isn't it? But whether this will make any impact at all, the news they've been waiting for, we'll have to see.
I think it's extremely unlikely that it's going to have any impact, not least because the Bank of England Monetary Policy Committee will meet tomorrow, and the expectation is that they will hold interest rates, partly for fear that they would look too political were they to cut them just a couple of weeks before a general election. Look, this is ultimately good news for the British economy. It's good news for people who've been suffering through the cost of living crisis. Interest rates will stay at 5.25%, but the fact that finally, after a 3-year rollercoaster, inflation is down to the 2%, Bank of England's 2% target is ultimately good news. And it should be good news for the Conservative Party. This is one of the 5 pledges that Rishi Sunak has been able to deliver on, but it's very unlikely that...
Rare sighting of the lesser spotted hunt. It's a very shy creature that hasn't been out very much. They've given an interview to the FT. They'll get no political dividend. They didn't take any blame for the soaring inflation, so you're not going to get any praise when it comes down. I mean, it's the way it is, isn't it? You didn't want the pain.
It seems to be with 2 weeks to go. Anyway, lots more. We haven't even touched the sides of the papers we want to talk about, so we've got lots to pack in the next half, including this in the Daily Mail, is nothing sacred to the eco-clowns, their front page for tomorrow's papers.
They were doing everything right. They were on a lifeguarded beach and both could swim. They weren't too deep. They were with people. I'd never ever heard of a drowning in a rip current.
My son said that they were up to about their chest, and then he said just suddenly they couldn't touch the bottom.
Our two weren't weak children. Sunna was tall. Joe was 6 foot tall, strong, muscly, and he got knocked off his feet and taken by the waves. There needs to be discussion about water safety as a whole.
It's a concerning statistic. I mean, there's a lot of contributing factors that could be leading to this rise in child drownings in particular. We've certainly seen probably more warm weather events, and we know that there is a link between those heat waves and instances of drowning. There's more people exploring open water through sports such as paddle boarding or going out and open water swimming in areas that they're not necessarily familiar with. And there's also, in all likelihood, a link between COVID lockdown and people not receiving those swimming lessons because of leisure centres being closed that they might have done in the past. We're in the middle of the Royal Life Saving Society's Drowning Prevention Week. And that's all about learning the water safety code in order to keep you and your family safe, really, around water. And that's about stopping and thinking, assessing the situation before you enter the water, immerse yourself slowly to protect against that cold water shock. It's about staying together, not to go out swimming by yourself, but to make sure that there's somebody with you in case somebody does get into trouble. Dial 999, so don't follow somebody in that you see in trouble, because actually that can exacerbate the problem and create more casualties. And then finally, float. And that's about getting onto your back in the starfish position, saving energy and awaiting rescue in the right way. The strapline of the Royal Life Saving Society is about enjoy water safely. So we don't want to put people off going into the water, whether that be at the coast or indeed inland. But certainly when there's youngsters involved, then we're conscious that issues can happen. Therefore, we'd encourage all parents to keep an eye on your children.
Well, welcome back. You are watching the press preview. With me are Kev Maguire and Annabel Denham. Welcome back to both of you. Let's go to The Guardian. Rachel Reeves promising to close the gender pay gap once and for all. Make flexible working the norm, she says. Still don't know how this is achievable.
No, look, I want to be reasonably sympathetic towards Reeves because she will become the first female Chancellor of the Exchequer, and she will be an inspiration to young girls, and they will have somebody to look up to, a role model who has reached this very high office in British politics. Nonetheless, there are a lot of problems with the use of the term gender pay gap. So since 2017, companies with a headcount of over 250 have been forced to publish their gender pay gaps, but there are so many problems with the data, including the fact that you are comparing, for instance, EasyJet pilots with EasyJet cabin crew and then complaining that female cabin crew are being paid less than male pilots, when, of course, they're not doing the same job, that I think it can lead people to draw the wrong conclusions. And what worries me is that companies may then be villainised and demonised, but also that we're feeding this sort of victimhood narrative that women are never going to be able to achieve as much as men.
Well, that's because of the chunks of time off that women have to take.
Well, of course, we have a problem with the motherhood penalty as well.
I think that's where the gap really... Sorry.
If I may mansplain. But between the ages of 22 and 39, the gender pay gap, according to the annual survey of hours and earnings, is negligible between men and women, and actually it's later in life that the gap
Because
starts
women
to
then are
emerge
often
because
carers
women
for
are
older
often
parents, you see, as
well,
well, aren't they?
sandwich
But yeah.
generation.
But you can
So-
calculate the value of jobs, so it's equal value, and it's where, for instance, hospital porters would be paid more than people working in the canteen, because the porters tended to be men and those in the canteen tended to be women, but the jobs were of
Doing
equal
that to
value.
Birmingham Council. But
Yeah,
yes.
so it's not saying a stewardess, cabin crew doing the same jobs as
Well, they're
pilots,
too- I mean,
but you can come up with the gaps. Are the disparities too great?
But that's equal pay for equal work, which is a quasi-Marxist concept that I'm not personally in favour of.
I think I love it.
That's separate to the
But I think
gender
that
pay gap.
14.3% gap she's identified is, you can't really defend that. We have to find a way of closing that.
Yeah.
Where I will slightly disagree
If
with
you
her,
could do it quickly.
she talks about being the last glass ceiling in politics. It is a glass ceiling, but I'd say there is one for class, economic class.
Yeah.
There is also one still on race, heritage. I'd say there's still one on disability. Maybe some other groups. So I think there are others. So she's right. There is a ceiling there, glass ceiling.
And I note the
others
Times
exist
on the
too.
flexible working suggests working from home makes staff happier but not more productive. We'll talk about that later.
Very good for Tory MPs who'll be spending a lot of time at home. Although they won't be working, will they?
Don't gloat. I haven't got time to talk about, but we will show the papers leading on Stonehenge, which has angered certainly the political leaders. The Mail and Express both leading on the Stonehenge pictures. Is nothing sacred to the eco-clowns. That is the verdict of the Daily Mail. I have to say thank you to both of you. There you go, just lock them up. That is the Daily Express as well. Big story too, lots to talk about tonight. Didn't pack everything we wanted to. Kevin Maguire and Annabel Denham, thank you very much indeed. Let's just have a quick look at the weather. It will be quite sunny into the weekend, and there's a chance of a heat wave developing next week. There'll be a mainly fine start tomorrow, although rather chilly out of town. Rather grey and damp, though, from the northwest of Ireland through to central Scotland. Expect the odd fog patch elsewhere, too. The morning will stay dry and sunny for most. Well, lots to talk about in Sky News at 11. Our press preview continues. Good and bad news for Rishi Sunak. Inflation down 2% rather, but a new poll suggesting a Tory wipeout and the lowest number of seats ever.